Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over, minute by minute, the greatest adventure movie Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston movie, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, Senior Editor for the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and lifelong airplane geek.
And we are already up to minute 5. This is a great first week, I think. And this is going to be the episode where we finally climb out of the opening credits. And so we've got some major league credits coming up here. The first title that we see in the first couple of seconds as the GeeBee is starting to circle Chaplin Field is produced by Lawrence Gordon, Charles Gordon, and Lloyd Levin. And these guys are powerhouses in the action-adventure movies. The stuff that they've been... let's start with Larry Gordon, who he started working with Aaron Spelling. He learned his trade with a TV master. Went to work for American International Pictures, which is a lot of low-budget to mid-budget kind of drive-in movies. And then, through all that, he wound up as president of 20th Century Fox back
really?
in the mid-'80s.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize he'd gone that far. That's spectacular.
Yeah, he came in there and got together with that stuff. He did have some... he was just in time to greenlight Die Hard, the first of the Die Hard movies. So that was his big claim to fame. Then he split from 20th Century Fox and started his own company, Largo Entertainment. They were in big with a bunch of international styled movies. They did a lot of Oscar bait, I think would be the best word to describe it. They did things like Field of Dreams, Point Break, Mulholland Falls, G.I. Jane, and that was most of the 90s. I mean, he had some really monster hits back in the 90s with his brother Charles Gordon, who is also listed there, the second guy in the credits right after Larry. You know, it's just amazing when you see some of his work. But mostly he focuses on very personal dramas. He doesn't do like epic non-fictions, but he does these single person center protagonist characters, of which this is one of them. I guess this is mostly focused on Cliff and his relationship with everybody else around him, but Cliff is kind of at the center of the web there. And we're the third name on there, Lloyd Levin. Lawrence Gordon was in his kind of toward the end of his career. He was in the 50s and 60s, although he's still doing some stuff. He's in his 80s as we're recording this. Lloyd Levin back then was in his 30s. He worked. He was a producer on Die Hard. He executive produced Die Hard 2. A lot of the follow-ups. He did Die Hard 2. He did Predator 2. He did one of my favorite movies. I wish we could do a movie minute about Mystery Men.
No kidding.
Yeah. He was the EP on Mystery Men.
Wasn't he involved with Watchmen as well?
That's right. Yeah, all of these with Universal, and
gotcha.
he did United '93. Was probably one of the few nonfiction ones that he worked on. So
interesting.
A lot of action, a lot of activities in his movies. They're not sleepers. And so we're watching the GeeBee while all of these things are going on. The GeeBee's flying around the back of what is I guess that's an air race route at Chaplin Field. We're seeing it going by one of the pylons there, the big red and white pylons. Right, and
that it's that tradition of those that red and white pylon continues to this day at the Reno air races, held every September down in Nevada. And forgive me, I'm looking at this minute again. It goes by pretty quickly. I think we get better shots of it in other minutes, but at least one of those pylons is labeled Bendix. Yeah, and I can't recall if we get a really good glimpse at it or not. But anyway, this area would have been the start of the Bendix race from Burbank to Cleveland for the National Air Races, and we've talked about the National Air Races in an earlier episode. But it's a nice touch thinking about this being potentially a launching point for the Bendix race, the cross country race to get to the Nationals.
Yeah, still trying to figure out. I mean, I'm assuming that it's either the Burbank Airport that we're looking at here, the basics of the Burbank Airport, or if it's Van Nuys Airport. That's another possibility,
right?
Which at the time would have been Metropolitan Airport.
Now, if we're establishing this as the start of the Bendix, it should be Burbank, as that started in Burbank every year, except there were 2 years it actually started on the East Coast, went New York to Cleveland, but otherwise that Bendix race was Burbank to Cleveland, which seems like kind of an odd direction to go. Like, you're in Burbank, why would you be in a hurry to get to Cleveland? of all
Yeah.
places. But it was the Nationals, as we've talked about, a big deal in aviation at this era.
Wow. My closest I've been to this was the the Bendix Diner outside of Teterboro Airport. It's a big popular diner still to this day. Um, but it is again, we're back with this beautiful camera work and editing. The editing is just fantastic, going back and forth. We have that one little isolated spot of Peavy watching what's going on, keeping a careful look at it, while Goose and Skeets in the back are just kind of chatting with each other about how great the takeoff was.
Right.
And we're looking at Cliff's coming back in for a low-level pass, and an extremely low-level pass. I mean, I'm thinking it's about 3 or 4 feet when he finally is leveled off down the runway there.
Yeah, there's a point there where it almost looks even closer than that, and he's got that nice turn going at first, which looks like he's going to do what we'd call a banana pass, a nice curving pass, but then levels it out. And like you said, the editing, cutting back and forth, the continuity between the real GeeBee flying by and then looking at Bill Campbell in the back of the Waco is really sharp. There's one shot. Let me get to the second of it here. I think it's the first time we cut back to him as he comes around the corner on the pass. You can actually see a shadow pass over the cockpit from the. It's got to be from the upper wing of the Waco as he's making that turn.
Yeah.
And it's. The Rocketeer is probably not the best movie ever made or the most technically perfect movie ever made, but I don't know that there's a movie for which I have more affection. And it's hard for me to get in there and find any little thing that feels wrong. It's almost a challenge because there's got to be something I can point out. But boy, I just adore every second of this movie.
Just such it's such a love affair with flight. And every when you're watching this movie a minute or even frame by frame,
Right.
every single frame of this movie, it just looks like a painting. Just the GB's flashing its tail its tail number on as it's coming by, and it's just a gorgeous thing, seeing the beautiful sky, the morning light of everything.
Well, the color palette always amazed me too, because you've got sort of the desert scrub, and you've got kind of a rough airport, and the buildings are a bit drab. Even the wardrobe is all sort of fairly muted, but then you've got this beautiful yellow and black airplane, and then the other airplanes that we see for around the airport for set dressing. We've certainly talked about some of them before, but right as he's making that pass, he gives the thumbs up. He looks back. Peavy's there cheering him on with a thumbs up. You've got those two airplanes right behind them there. You just get a glimpse. It's a Stinson Junior. It's a SM-8A, and then behind it, you just see the nose of this blunt blue nose airplane, and that's a replica of a French racer called the Caudron C460. And that airplane actually won the Bendix race in, I believe it was 1936. So in the continuity of the film, it was the winner 2 years ago.
Wow. And all these airmen are probably just wandering around the field too. I mean, this is their, at least their home port for the time being.
Sure, exactly. So it makes sense. You might have some competitors there, but the competition was fierce. But there was also, you imagine there was a pretty strict camaraderie among these early pilots as well, and they weren't above helping each other out. So it would make sense. You would see maybe as we're gearing up toward these races, you would see some of the other airplanes around. Now, the Stinson wouldn't be racing, certainly not in the same category as the others, but it's very much period appropriate. And then there's one other airplane we spot in this scene, which we've discussed before. That's that gorgeous. It's a blurry shot. It's blinking, you'll miss it as the GeeBee roars by. But it's that Travel Air mystery ship. So
right, the beautiful red craft across there next to the hangar. It's just it's an amazing collection. I mean, it's a good. It's almost great that they made this movie as an excuse to show all these planes off and up on a big screen.
Absolutely.
I had read somewhere these low passes and things like that. They had limited the number of times the GeeBee could land because the landing gear is quite fragile, and it takes quite a pounding when it lands, especially on a on a gravel or a packed clay field. They were worried about wrecking the wheels on it, so they kind of limited the number of landings that they did with the plane during the shoot.
Right. Yeah. The biggest thing you'd be fighting. I mean, number one, it's it's an extremely challenging airplane to fly, a challenging airplane to land. We've talked about that a little bit when we first talked about the GeeBee and construction of the replica and things like that. But my educated guess is one of the biggest things they'd be worrying about. Number one, let's just minimize the number of landings because it's difficult and it's a squirrely airplane. We don't want to risk it, but also that landing gear would be especially susceptible to any kind of side load. So if there's a little bit of wind, if you're not tracking perfectly straight on landing, it could buckle. Although I have a sense that also, getting shot at by gangsters can make landing difficult too. But that just feels like foreshadowing of some kind.
I would think, yeah. So we finally get to our last, thankfully, our last credit here, which is directed by Joe Johnston. And Joe Johnston is just hero of great movies. He started out working for Lucas, working on he did a lot of technical direction or art direction for Empire Strikes Back. So he has quite a background in special effects, and he also seems to have a great role. We've talked about this at the very beginning of this film, about how he doesn't let special effects take over the movie. They're an important part of a lot of his films, but mostly he's concerned on telling the story, bringing a comic book to life. I mean, you can see when you watch these movies, you can see the set pieces and how he goes from scene to scene to scene, and the story is told visually. And it's just enjoyable. And you think about other movies that he's made. The reason that he did the recent Captain America was because of the Rocketeer. He understood how to do a period piece without making it look dated. He brought forth the most important thing to him is the characters. I can't stress how great a director Joe Johnston is in terms of being able to, as a storyteller, he knows how to tell a story.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Empire Strikes Back, and he did actually do some work on Episode 4 as well, A New Hope. He was did illustration and design work. I, as a kid, had the Star Wars sketchbook in my collection, and I think it's since disintegrated. Unfortunately, to hunt down another copy, but as I recall, that had a lot of his work in it as well. And he dabbled a little bit in Battlestar Galactica when that came around, but so cut his teeth on one set of movies that had a huge impact on me. Then, of course, The Rocketeer, and then many years later, The First Avenger. As you said, he knows how to do period pieces without making them feel dated, but he knows a lot about subtle and clever world building too. Whatever that is. And I guess Star Wars, it's a long time ago. I guess that's a period piece as well, if you think about it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and he does know, like what you're saying about world building. His first, solo directing thing. A lot of people think of it as a Spielberg movie, but Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was actually directed by Joe Johnston. So
that's
he could tell a story in an unusual situation, and still the people that you cared about the characters. You didn't care about the special effects, even though you had fighting ants and stuff like that. It's still, in unusual situations, he still manages to bring out the humanity in his characters.
Exactly.
So, really is one of my favorite directors that doesn't let visual effects get in the way of telling a story.
Right. And he did another favorite of mine that, and I hate to admit it, I always forget that it's him. I just know I love the film. It's not, obviously not a blockbuster like some of the others, but that was October Sky.
Yes.
And you as a rocket scientist of sorts, aerospace engineer, must have some affinity for that, just like I do.
Yeah, I every October on October 4th, my wife and I watch October Sky.
Oh, do you? That's terrific.
kind of a tradition here, and that's the anniversary of the launch of Sputnik.
Right.
A great telling of a story. I mean, a lot of times we'll watch movies like The Right Stuff and Apollo 13 Apollo 13 does manage to bridge the gap, but a lot of times they focus on the astronauts, which is an important role, but the idea that there is a lot of science behind this, a lot of people have tested things, a lot of people have engineered mechanical craft that can do these things and do all these amazing things. We kind of think of the folks on the front lines, but there's a lot of folks in the back office that do these things. And October Sky really focuses on Homer Hickam and his high school buddies who wind up being rocket scientists for it just to pass the time and also to find their sense of wonder in an upcoming field,
Right.
and managing to tell that story and make it fascinating to general audiences, people who don't know how rockets are made or what they do. He manages to lay all this stuff out and build a drama out of what's basically a technical development.
Absolutely, and more of that great world building too. The starting out in the coal mining town and what that must have felt like, what that atmosphere was like, and respectable, honest work, but a kid who really knows he's meant for something very, very different, and wanting to get away with that without making it a cliche or a parody of itself.
Okay, I'm writing down octoberskyminute.com.
Register that on our way out today.
Wow. Well, yes, if you have, I would strongly recommend to our viewers, if you like The Rocketeer, go watch some of the other Joe Johnston movies, and you can start with October Sky. If you haven't seen it yet, I envy you for having not seen it yet, because it's going to be an exciting first experience. Finally, out of the credits, well, we do get to one credit here that sets the stage. We're saying Los Angeles, 1938, so that kind of puts us in a particular place in time. A lot of people who don't live in Los Angeles, or when you think of Los Angeles, you generally think of Hollywood. And although this movie does concentrate on a lot of the Hollywood aspects of Los Angeles is a huge, sprawling place. It's, I think it's larger than the state of Rhode Island. So there's a lot of different climates, a lot of different things going on. In this movie, we're talking about two of the major products of California. We're talking about aerospace and movies. So, but we're also seeing things like farming. There's a lot of talks about the bean fields that were surrounding, everything from Encino to up into the Imperial Valley. A lot of agriculture was going on,
right?
And the beautiful California countryside, seeing those rolling hills and things. Just it must have been a great time back then, relatively unpopulated as to today. So.
Absolutely, and you mentioned aerospace, and of course that's huge in this area. Burbank was the home of Lockheed, and I don't think they were quite calling it Lockheed at this point. They may, actually, I think they probably were by 38. It was, and I always struggle with the pronunciation, but it was the two. I sort of pronounce it Lougheed Brothers, and then they stylized it as Lockheed. So they were there. Manasco was there building airplane engines. Built a great sort of inline inverted four-cylinder airplane engine. We mentioned Bendix, who started in automotive parts and brakes and things, but had by this time had become Bendix Aviation, and that's why they sponsored, to promote that brand, they sponsored the Bendix race from Burbank to Cleveland to kick off the national air races every year out there.
Yeah, and then there was also the Texas-based oil tooling company that had moved out to California.
Oh, sure, of course, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, though. Yeah. But a lot of people were switching over to aerospace to get into this up and coming tech. This was the Silicon Valley of aircraft. Really had moved west, and there was so much activity going on all in the LA area. So this is an ideal location for this film,
absolutely,
as it was for the comic book.
Oh, I was just going to say too. We've talked a lot about the GeeBee so far. We've talked about how the GeeBee-Z, the yellow and black one that. The movie Airplane was created as a replica of, that won the Thompson race at the Nationals, but that was back in 1931. So that's if there's an anachronism in this movie with airplanes go, that's probably about as bad as it gets. That we're maybe a few years off in terms of this GeeBee-Z being a real contender. When by that time the GeeBees had moved on to the R1 and the R2. But while the Bendix race is the cross-country race, the Thompson race, which we've talked about before, and we were talking just earlier this episode about the pylons, that was a closed course pylon race, so that was much more of a spectator sport.
How close do you have to approach the pylons? I mean, you have to stay to the right of them, but I would think that the tighter your turn, the more speed you'd gain.
Right. It's like anything, it's like any other kind of racing, and basically it's as close as possible, obviously without striking one. Now we have, if you've ever seen the Red Bull air races, it's somewhat similar in that it's also a closed course, but it's only one aircraft at a time, and there's some aerobatic components in it. But there's a whole series of pylons and gates that are insanely complicated. But the trick there is that they're inflatable, and so it's not uncommon for a pilot to hit one of the pylons because they're that fast and that close. But in the case of the inflatable pylons, they just deflate, and there's usually no damage of any kind to the airplane, just a little bit of pride for the pilot, or for the pilot. But in cases like this, like racing at Reno, obviously there's a lot of strategy, and there's going high and going low. But really, the trick is just what you would think: is let's get as close as we can and make those turns as tight as we can without bleeding off too much energy.
On a race like that, in a regional race, how long would that generally go? I mean, the courses are generally about 10 miles in?
Yeah, so one of the closed loop courses like that, like, really what Cliff is sort of training for and preparing to go off and do. It's a 10-mile course, and if I remember right, it was 10 laps. So it's a 100-mile race. And at the time that the GBZ won it, if I remember right, the speed, and I think we've talked about this a little bit before, the speed was something like 240 miles an hour, which is pretty amazing, and especially given the fact that for a time, a couple of different GeeBee models were the fastest airplanes in the world, and I don't mean fastest sort of privately owned or civilian airplanes. I mean fastest airplanes, period. And how strange that must have been for back then, what was the Army Air Corps, to see private citizens flying airplanes that are faster than their fastest fighters.
Literally drive rings around them. It just
right.
Fly rings around.
It's not like today we have many. You and I can't go down to an airport and rent an airplane and go faster than an F-22. That would just be all but unheard of, or faster than an SR-71 or something like that. So it was pretty remarkable at the time. And of course, after World War II, that landscape changed so much with these air races that it really became much more about either ex-military aircraft or even current military aircraft operated by military pilots. The Air Force sent flights of 3 B-47 bombers to compete as a group in the Bendix race. And they just had their own category. You still had your piston engine racers like we're seeing here, but then you also had the jet bomber category. So the Air Force really like to play.
Yeah. So we fade out of, or we don't fade. We are kind of interrupted by or punctuated by the Thompson machine gun wielding Lenny, who is driving in the back of a Dodge there, shooting straight at the camera to get our attention. Right. So those beautiful Thompson machine guns shooting 50 caliber bullets, which are half an inch wide.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I was just going to say two things sort of come to mind here. Number one, you pointed out in your synopsis of this minute that this is where the opening theme ends. So not only we're getting shot in the face, we're losing that theme. We've talked about James Horner and the score and stuff, but this is one of my favorite pieces of music. That whole opening theme is there's so much brightness and promise to it as it goes along, and it's a masterstroke to not only have it end right here, but sort of have it end in this hail of gunfire to say, everything we thought was sunny and happy is not necessarily going to go all that well for us for right now.
Yeah, the party is over, and and it does end on that. As far as I can count, it was 9 key changes through that piece. So that was quite a lot of reading on the part of the orchestra. God bless them for being able to do that. That's a tough way to get through. But so we're watching Lenny driving away there. We'll find out that his name is Lenny later. But the Dodge is being chased by an LAPD black and white, which is a Ford. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that's also a Dodge. And I have it backwards. Lenny's in the Ford. The LAPD is a Dodge sedan, and then there's another Ford Deluxe that's following up the rear.
That's right. Lenny's in the rumble seat of the
right.
Ford, and then
yes,
the LAPD are coming in that Dodge. Another more great set dressing, more great little bits of world building. Cars very, very appropriate for the era. I think we decided the FBI vehicle back there is a 38 Ford. So of course the feds are driving something brand new. The city cops, it's a year old, it's still pretty good. Bad guys driving a car that's a few years old, but all very appropriate. We're not seeing a 65 Mustang or something out of the blue.
Yeah. And then we were introduced to Wilmer, who he's not having a good day. He's when you're being chased by both local and federal agents, you've got a problem.
Right.
And that Wilmer, of course, is played by Max Grodenchik, who he's probably best known as Nog from Deep Space Nine. Here, getting to play a human being for a change, and he's bouncing along with. We're going to talk about a little bit more about this case that gets a brief scene bouncing along next to poor Wilmer in the front seat there. Lenny, I don't know if they've thought this out very much. It's kind of, Lenny's trying to get them to back off, but I don't think he's doing much in the way of getting the policeman off of his back there.
Right. A couple of things sort of popped into my head. Number one, that first glimpse of that authorized personnel only. It's just the case. If you first see the movie, if you feel like the case could just say MacGuffin right across it, this is obviously this is important, and we're all chasing each other about it, and we're fighting over it, and everything else. But I had a modest law enforcement career a couple of lifetimes ago, and I was in a few high-speed pursuits. Nobody was ever shooting back at me with a Tommy gun or any other kind of gun, but it did always strike me that. What's really going through their mind? Where do they hope to get? Are they waiting? Do they think a timer is going to go off? And if I haven't caught them in 10 minutes, then the bell rings, we all go home. As you say, Wilmer and Lenny don't really have an exit strategy. They just want to get, I guess that's why they call it a getaway car. They're just trying to get away. But what really do they hope to achieve?
Yeah, I was wondering if either Wilmer or Lenny knew how to fly a plane, as they're kind of indirectly heading for Chaplin Field. So maybe they were thinking, throw it in a plane and take off, or get a pilot to fly them out. But
yeah, that's a good point.
It's clear, pretty good thinking on the part of them trying to find an alternate route of transportation. But we finally get introduced to the two FBI agents who are furthest back on the chase. Fitch and Wooly's driving. Right. Fitch is yelling at Wooly, and also operating a gun, because I think he's also under the mistaken impression that somehow he's going to be able to stop somebody with a revolver. And
right.
Again, we're back. Since it is the 30s, everybody's wearing a hat. It seems like outdoors, and both Fitch and Wooly are accompanied by really stunning fedoras.
I miss those days, even though this movie takes place 30 years before I was born. I still somehow miss those days.
On my other show, the Airport Minute, we talked about fedoras and trilbies and all kinds of things that signaled at the time, or then this was all the way into 1970, that the type of hat that you wore kind of signaled who you were in society. And
right.
Fitch, the fellow in the passenger seat, is wearing a rather dapper fedora. He's got very sharp creases on his fedora, and apparently, cares about that. He's a bit of that kind of indicates that he's preening a bit. He's very fashion forward, kind of conscious guy. Wooly, wearing a more shapeless hat, is kind of that kind of signals that you're more grizzled, you're more you're less concerned about your appearance. So it's kind of like it's the equivalent of a 5 o'clock shadow, the way he's wearing his hat. And it's interesting to see that there are. I'm sure that the costumers and the art direction here know these kind of signals. And it's kind of odd that we as an audience, even though we didn't live in the 30s, we still managed to get the signals from the hat of how these guys were. Their personalities are determined by how they're wearing their hats.
It's funny too. We don't know, on screen, and we don't know their names at this point. But when you say Fitch and Wooly, and you ask me, which one's the sharp dressed one and which one's a little bit rough around the edges, it's obvious. Fitch is the Felix Unger, and Wooly is the Oscar Madison. Maybe not to that extent, but
and they're also coming in from a different world. The guys that we've been seeing so far have been wearing, the jumpsuits, pretty much the mechanics one-piece outfits, right, and stuff. Now we're getting back to into the regular world there, where it was normal to wear a jacket and a tie and a hat, no matter what you're doing, no matter what the excitement. This was the uniform of of people in the day. Even we're watching Wilmer driving there. He's got on a shirt and a tie and a rather dapper vest and a tam o' shanter type cap. Quite a stylish set for folks nowadays. I mean, I think Wilmer would probably be wearing pajama pants and maybe a t-shirt, or who knows. We'll see. And it would have
probably a wife beater at this point,
like a band name written across the front. So we're gonna kind of pause here at the end of the week with an exciting car chase. But it's been a good first week, I think. This is there's a lot of action. We got the beautiful James Horner theme, a lot of introductions going on, and we know everything there is to know about the the major crew working on this movie. So let's pick this up again first thing Monday morning. If everybody can join us here also you can also join us at any of our social media places. You can go to Twitter, Rocketeer Minute. You can go to our Bulldog Cafe that's on Facebook, just for the Rocketeers Bulldog Cafe, where everybody gets together and talks about these episodes. And, of course, the big site, RocketeerMinute.com, where you can get copies of The Rocketeer available on Amazon and all other kinds of neat stuff to read about in this episode and previous episodes, so you can catch up. So why not join us back here next week as we follow this exciting car chase. This is kind of the precursor of all those L.A. helicopter shows on the news in the afternoons in L.A. So we'll watch the granddaddy of them all right here. So we'll see you next time on The Rocketeer. Until then, over and out.
Go get him, kid.